The cost of living in the United States has been a growing concern for millions of Americans. Over the last few decades, the prices of essential goods and services, housing, healthcare, education, transportation, and food, have steadily increased while wages have failed to keep up. As more people are forced to take on second jobs or fall deeper into debt just to survive, the question arises: why is it so expensive to live in the US? And how can we solve this crisis? The rising costs of essential goods and services. Housing costs. Housing is one of the biggest contributors to the high cost of living in the US. Over the past few decades, real estate prices in major cities and even many smaller towns have skyrocketed. According to the National Association of Realtors, the median home price in the US increased by 29% between 2020 and 2023 alone, reaching over $400,000 in 2023. Rental prices have followed a similar trajectory, with cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco seeing average rent prices surpassing $3,000 per month.
The reasons behind this surge in housing costs are multifaceted. Urbanization, restrictive zoning laws, and a lack of affordable housing construction have created a supply-demand imbalance. As more people move to cities for job opportunities, housing demand has outpaced supply. Developers have focused on building luxury units, driven by higher profit margins, leaving fewer affordable options for middle and lower-income families.
Healthcare costs. Healthcare is another significant burden on American wallets. The US has one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world, with total healthcare expenditure per person exceeding $12,000 annually. Despite these high costs, many Americans still struggle to access quality care. The reasons for high healthcare costs include a complex insurance system, exorbitant administrative costs, pharmaceutical price hikes, and the practice of fee-for-service billing. Unlike many other developed nations, the US lacks a universal healthcare system, leaving many to rely on private insurance plans or pay out of pocket. Even those with insurance face high deductibles, co-pays, and prescription drug costs, leading to medical debt that further strains household finances. Education costs. The rising cost of higher education has put an enormous financial strain on American families. Since the 1980s, tuition rates at public universities have risen by more than 200%, with the average student graduating with over $30,000 in student loan debt. The cost of attending private institutions is even higher. This increase is driven by several factors, including reduced state funding for public universities, rising administrative costs, and the growing demand for advanced technology and infrastructure on campuses. The burden of student loans forces many graduates to delay major life decisions, such as buying a home, starting a family, or investing in retirement, contributing to financial insecurity.
Transportation costs. Owning and maintaining a vehicle in the US is another significant expense for many households. Gas prices, car insurance, maintenance costs, and monthly car payments all contribute to the high cost of transportation. Public transportation is not always a viable alternative, particularly in rural and suburban areas, where public transit infrastructure is limited or non-existent.
Food costs. The cost of groceries has also risen in recent years, due in part to supply chain disruptions, climate change, and increased transportation costs. Families in lower income brackets are disproportionately affected by these increases, as a higher percentage of their income goes toward food.
The wage stagnation problem. While the cost of living has risen sharply, wages for the average American worker have remained stagnant. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the median wage in the United States increased by only 12% between 1979 and 2020, while productivity rose by 61%. This disconnect between productivity and wage growth has led to growing income inequality, where the rich continue to accumulate wealth while the middle and lower classes struggle to keep up with rising expenses. This wage stagnation is compounded by the decline of unionization, the shift from manufacturing to service-based economies, and the rise of gig economy jobs, which often lack benefits and job security.
How are people making ends meet? With the cost of living outpacing wage growth, many Americans are forced to take drastic measures to survive. Some of the most common strategies include: 1. Taking on second jobs. According to a 2023 report from the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, nearly 8 million Americans work more than one job to make ends meet. This includes individuals who work a full-time job during the day and then take on part-time work in the evenings or on weekends. The gig economy, driven by platforms like Uber, DoorDash, and TaskRabbit, has become a lifeline for those seeking additional income, even though these jobs often come with low wages and no benefits. Yeah, it's tough. I work my regular 9 to 5, and then I drive for Uber in the evenings. It's not ideal, but it's what I have to do to pay the bills. The extra income helps, but it's exhausting, and there's no job security or benefits.
Many Americans rely on credit cards to cover basic expenses when their income falls short. According to a study by the Federal Reserve, the average American household carries over $6,000 in credit card debt, which can quickly accumulate due to high interest rates. Payday loans and other short-term lending options, while offering quick access to cash, often trap borrowers in a cycle of debt with exorbitant fees. To cope with financial stress, many families are forced to cut back on essentials such as healthcare, food, and utilities. Delaying doctor's visits, skipping prescription medications, or relying on food banks are common strategies among those struggling to stay afloat. In extreme cases, people face eviction or foreclosure due to an inability to pay rent or mortgage payments.
Addressing the high cost of living in the US requires both short-term relief measures and long-term structural changes. Here are some potential solutions. Increasing affordable housing. To combat rising housing costs, governments at the federal, state, and local levels should prioritize building affordable housing. This could involve revising zoning laws to allow for higher density housing, investing in public housing projects, and offering tax incentives to developers who build affordable units. Rent control policies could also be expanded in cities where housing markets are particularly tight. However, these policies should be carefully designed to avoid discouraging investment in new housing or causing a decrease in the quality of available rentals. Implementing universal healthcare. A universal healthcare system, similar to those in countries like Canada or the UK, could significantly reduce healthcare costs for American families. By removing the profit-driven model of private insurance, a single-payer system could streamline administrative costs, negotiate lower drug prices, and provide more equitable access to care.
Yes, a universal healthcare system could ensure that everyone receives the care they need without the financial barriers that currently exist. It could lead to a healthier, more productive society overall. Reforming education funding. The federal government should work with states to increase funding for public universities and community colleges, reducing the financial burden on students. Policies that forgive or reduce student loan debt, especially for graduates in low-paying professions, such as teaching or social work, could also provide relief. Additionally, expanding access to vocational and technical training programs can help individuals acquire valuable skills without the high costs of traditional college degrees. Raising the federal minimum wage to a livable level would help many workers keep up with the rising cost of living. As of 2024, the federal minimum wage remains at $7.25 per hour, a rate that has not increased since 2009. Many states and cities have already raised their minimum wages, but a national standard would ensure that all workers benefit from fair compensation.
Strengthening workers' rights. Rebuilding the labour movement and expanding workers' rights could help combat wage stagnation. Policies that make it easier for workers to unionize and collectively bargain for better pay, benefits, and working conditions could help close the gap between productivity and wages. Expanding social safety nets. Expanding programs like food assistance, housing vouchers, and childcare subsidies can provide immediate relief to struggling families. Additionally, policies such as universal basic income or expanded child tax credits could provide a more stable source of income for low and middle-income households.
Where will the madness end? The cost of living crisis in the US has reached a breaking point for many Americans. As more people are forced to work multiple jobs, rely on debt, or cut back on essentials just to survive, the long-term social and economic consequences could be severe. Income inequality continues to widen, and the financial pressures facing middle and lower income families show no signs of easing without significant policy interventions. The question of where this madness will end remains unanswered. Will the US government take bold steps to address the root causes of rising costs and wage stagnation? Or will millions of Americans continue to struggle in an increasingly unequal society? Some advocates argue that socialism could provide the answer to the cost of living crisis in the US by addressing the root causes of inequality and redistributing wealth more equitably. Under a socialist framework, key sectors like healthcare, education, housing, and utilities would be publicly owned or heavily regulated, ensuring that everyone has access to these essentials at affordable rates. This model would eliminate the profit-driven nature of capitalism in these areas, reducing costs for everyday Americans. Additionally, socialist policies such as universal health care, free college tuition, and stronger social safety nets could dramatically reduce the financial pressures on families. By prioritizing the needs of the many over the profits of a few, socialism presents a potential solution to the economic disparities that contribute to the rising cost of living. While the idea remains politically controversial in the US, especially with deeply ingrained capitalist structures, proponents believe that a shift towards socialist policies could create a more just and sustainable economic system.
The high cost of living in the US is a complex issue with no single solution. It is the result of decades of policy decisions, market forces, and societal changes. However, by increasing affordable housing, implementing universal health care, reforming education funding, raising the minimum wage, and expanding social safety nets, we can begin to alleviate the burden on American families. Ultimately, addressing the cost of living crisis requires a collective effort from government, businesses, and society as a whole. Without meaningful action, the gap between the wealthy and the rest of the population will continue to grow, leaving millions to wonder, how are we supposed to survive? The current trajectory is unsustainable, and without intervention the madness will continue. We must ask ourselves, how much longer can this go on before something breaks?